Good evening, and here are today's Tropics for September 22nd, 2019. Please note, I'm not a meteorologist, and these videos are just a collection of my thoughts and opinions about the storms I'm talking about. And for any decision making, please consult the National Hurricane Center, your local officials, or your National Weather Service office. First up, we got the tropical storm Karen. It formed at or developed at the 5 p.m. or a.m. advisory this morning. You can see that there is a generally obvious low-level center kind of right here north of the convection. It seems that this might not be dominant for too much longer based on recon observations, but you can see that's kind of mildly obvious that it is displaced a good bit to the north of the actively firing convection down here. So you can see that there's a lot of shear, and you can see that there's a lot of easterly shear really just ruling the Caribbean right now. Yeah, and there's a bit of the westerly flow at height here too. So see, there's upper troughing aloft too. So it's pretty hostile right now, at least in terms of upper level or the upper levels. If you look here, you can see it. The big reason for a lot of these easterlies, it's the upper ridge or upper anticyclone for Jerry. So its outflow here is coming down into the northeast Caribbean, and really just really going right through the entire Caribbean here. It's pretty shearing pretty much everything there, though there isn't really much convection. So you can see this northerly flow here coming into the Caribbean, and then you can see how the flow here is a bit more out of the east or east-northeast. So, I kind of drew this wrong, but you can see here that would lead to upper level convergence in this zone, and you can see that there is evidence that there is upper level convergence. There is that drier air to the north of Karen. And since it's coming up to this or to the northwest, it will run into this, so it's going to have to deal with shear from the northwest, and dry air at the same time, which it is going to be pretty difficult, and there is a good chance it might not even survive as a tropical cyclone getting through the Caribbean. There's a good chance that it dissipates and possibly reforms north of the Caribbean. So, one kind of interesting thing here, you can see that there is flow to the east here, but you are getting that flow to the west here. So, in the Caribbean, you've got the upper ridge dominating, and then the upper trough kind of dominating here. So here there is a good amount of upper divergence. So that's fueling some convection here, while there's a lot of dry air that's not, and upper convergence that's not really allowing much of this convection. But the center is north of that, or at least the old one is. So it's unless one can reform here, it's not not really that favorable anyway. And also it does seem that there's almost like northeasterly flow rather than northwesterly over the center, the convective area, and then the center. But the center, its position suggests the flow is more out of the northwest or northwest. That's because it is moving pretty briskly out of the southeast. So the kind of vector here, along with this kind of vector, is causing a lot of northerly shear, which does the convection south of the center most of the time, and does lead to center reformations mostly to the south. That does have track implications. We'll get to there. Go in the recon data. Let's update this. You can see that the pressure has stayed generally constant at about 1,007 millibars. It did move a bit southeast or to the northeast or northwest, but it seems that this center is weakened as they didn't really find much of a center where it would have been if the track had continued. Rather, it seems that there's a very weak center much to the southwest, so it seems that there was a center reformation to the southwest. And they didn't fly further south where there might have been some westerly winds. Instead, they only really found north or southerly winds. As you can see, this general area of southerly wind, they didn't really find any wind more westerly than the southwesterly around the center. So unless there is a good amount of westerly flow under this convection, there's a possibility that Karen has already opened up into a very strong tropical wave. But since there was a vortex data message there, this might mean that's still closed, and the advisories probably continue for at least for now. See here that it is coming to the northwest right now as it's steered by the subtropical ridge, but there you can see that it does go like pretty much north. That's due to the same trough that's taking Jerry out to sea in a few days. Or not really out to sea as there's Bermuda here, but is going to recurve at least. So that same trough is going to turn Karen to the north and then possibly hit some of the greater Antilles like Puerto Rico here. Again, it's not supposed to be really strong because the environment in the Caribbean is really pretty hostile right now. So you shouldn't expect a strong storm coming into Puerto Rico. It's probably going to be rather weak. The main concern is a lot of rain, possibly flooding rather than wind. But as it gets further north, it might get into a more favorable environment. And then the trough that is taking Jerry out might not take Karen out. You can't see it in here because these solutions are more than 5 days out. But you can see how it kind of slows down a bit towards the end of the week. This happens as the trough kind of moves too far east to really affect Karen, and it gets into weaker steering flow before a strong ridge really builds over over North America, and there's actually a good amount of model guidance that says it'll kind of like hook to the left and head possibly towards Florida. But again, even like this point is 5 days out, so there obviously is a lot that can change. And even though there's prediction for a strong ridge, we've seen what's happened with systems expected to hit Florida. They've kind of recurved near Florida, but we'll have to see if this does happen. We'll get a better idea once it gets out of the Caribbean, and we'll see the strength of it at where it is, and we'll have a lot more data than here where things are relatively uncertain, especially since that shear might allow for some more center reformation to the south given the northerly vector, which means we might see some west trends. So it might end up being more west than this. And if there's significant west trends, which aren't really expected since the cone doesn't go there, but if there is a lot of center reformation in the south, it might hit the Hispaniola, which would cause the center or whatever is left of it to be hit by a lot of mountainous terrain, which might prevent anything from really getting up here. So we'll have to see, but that's not really a likely scenario right now. It's more likely that it heads into the general Puerto Rico area right now. If you look at Jerry here, it's not looking so good. There is a good amount of deep convection here, but the center is more like at the edge of this deep convection, which means it's not really coupled to this. It's more decoupled from this convection. You can see in this reconnaissance pass here. Let's reload that. Yeah, you can see that right here. It's updated now, but it's right at the edge of the convection. and you can see there's weaker winds as there's no convection to really bring down those stronger winds at height to the surface. So it's no surprise we're only hitting like 20-25 knot winds here. You can see that there's a lot of like this stronger flow here. It's more like tropical storm force, a couple barbs near 50 knots. It's well, given that it's 55 knots at the latest advisory, this might be too strong given that even the flight level wind isn't really supporting that, at least yet. They haven't flown through this part of the system, which might have the strongest winds given that the cloud top temperatures are pretty low. They're at negative 80 degrees Celsius, which is pretty strong. If we look at this drop zone, this is probably why they went with 996 millibars. You can see that's what it was at the surface. But there's a rule that I learned that basically per every 10 knots of wind you get when there's a center drop zone, you reduce a millibar here, so it looks like it might be closer to 995 at the true center, but then again, this isn't really an eye, this is more just the center, which is at the edge of the stronger convection. So it might not be as representative. So if you look at the cone here, note that there's no hurricane strength. It's not supposed to get back up to hurricane strength, likely due to continuing westerly shear that isn't going to help it. It's not really like Umberto, which was really able to capitalize on that jet connection. This will likely have westerly shear that will kind of keep it lopsided and weaker. You can see that Bermuda is in the cone. It's more towards the edge, so it's not the most likely scenario that it does go over Bermuda, but you do want to note that since there is that westerly shear that is likely to continue, even if it does take a track, say like west of Bermuda, that shear might put a bit of convection over Bermuda, which will cause winds. Again, it's a bit early. It's like 2.5 days out, so we'll have to look at shifts of this track. But yeah, again, if you have any impacts in Bermuda, or if you have any interest in Bermuda, just keep an eye on Jerry to see if it will have any impacts. Given that's only supposed to be a tropical storm, it's probably not going to have any major wind impacts, which is good given that they were hit by Umberto just a few days ago. So if we look at lastly 90L, 90L, you can see that due to the diurnal minimum, you're getting a lot of convection just really fading out as the upper levels are warmer at this time of day rather than the sea surface temperatures, so you are seeing a more stable air, and convection is kind of hurt at this time of day. But you can see that it is relatively well organized. You can see this mid-level low that's spinning around here. So there is a well-defined mid-level low which can be brought down to the surface through convection and might already be near there. So it is on the verge of tropical depression status. You can see there is a kind of band type feature here which is supporting convection. So we just really need more convective organization near that mid-level low and better evidence for a surface circulation to actually be sure that this is a tropical depression, but it's probably going to be one in the next 24 hours. Next name is Lorenzo. The conditions in the main development region actually look pretty favorable, especially compared to this year. The big kind of crutch on a lot of the systems was very low relative humidity, like in 40s and 50% earlier this year. Dorian struggled with it before getting into the Bahamas, and even Jerry at times was struggling with it, but not as much as the relative humidity had risen. But this one will likely be dealing with mostly over 70% relative humidity, which is pretty good. And you can see that there isn't that large amount of convective suppression. It's doing relatively well again, especially for this year. So yeah, this year is also likely to be low. So it wouldn't be surprising to get a hurricane out of this, maybe even a major hurricane. And luckily, well, it doesn't show it here because there's pretty much a near certainty, at least in my opinion, that it will form at this by here. You can see this kind of gives an idea of the track it's expected to take. It's supposed to head basically like west-northwest for a while until it gets to around 40 to 45 west, when by that time the trough that's taking Jeria will have come eastward and will be kind of breaking up the Bermuda and Azores High, and that will allow 90L, or what will likely be Lorenzo by that point, will allow it to turn north and then recurve. However, that doesn't mean there won't be impacts on land. It is close enough to the southern parts of the Cabo Verde Islands that it's likely that there will be some wind and maybe some rain due to the close by pass, but it's not going to obviously go right over the Cabo Verde Islands. And the relatively clustered model guidance suggests that 90L at this point may be close to the Azores Islands, and by then it'll be strong. It might be transitioning to more extratropical at this point, as it'll be embedded in that northeasterly flow and likely be supported at least partially by baroclinic processes. But it's still likely that the pressure will be low as it passes by the Azores Islands and therefore have high winds. So it's very early. Most models or model guidance doesn't say it'll get in this area for until the next 10 days, which is a very, very long time. So maybe just keep an eye on the storm if you're in that area, but don't take it like too seriously until it's closer, and then you can really gauge what's going to go on with it. Like by then, because we'll get the idea. Will it miss? Will it miss either way? Will it hit the islands? We don't really know yet, obviously, because it's very far out. Even 5 days is a bit long to look at. 10 days is like way longer, at least meteorological timescales. So yeah, it's far out, but there is some signs that the Azores Islands may have some impacts from 90L. Anyway, that's about it for tonight. If you have any feedback, I'd be happy to hear it, and thank you for watching.